The first time I realized my life could be destroyed by someone else's ego. I was standing at a gate in the middle of a 1,000-car stampede, scanning badges while rain soaked through my uniform like it was paper. A few years ago, I was desperate for work. I'd just been medically discharged from the U.S. Army. I wasn't leaving on a victory lap either. Health took the decision out of my hands. Around the same time, I met the woman who's now my wife. She moved in with me and brought 2 little kids from her previous marriage. I went from trying to rebuild my life to trying to rebuild my life while being responsible for a family overnight. And I had almost nothing to offer employers. No shiny resume, no specialized certifications, no college degree that opened doors, just a military background, a broken exit from the service, and the kind of stubbornness you develop when life keeps punching and you still have to show up the next day. So when I saw a posting for a small security company, I went in, cleaned up, and took my shot. They loved the fact I'd served. They asked questions only a veteran would know. Details, terminology, situations, stuff you don't fake if you haven't lived it. After the interview, they didn't just offer me a job. They offered me their biggest contract. A major oil company was building a new headquarters and big construction site doesn't even cover it. This was a multi-million-dollar project with brutal deadlines running 24/7 with no breaks. 3 gates, constant traffic. If you worked one gate, you still felt the pulse of the entire site through your boots. On an 8-hour shift just through my gate, anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 vehicles would roll in. Multiply that across all gates and you're talking 3,000 to 6,000 vehicles in the same time frame. It was insane. Our job wasn't stand around and look tough. We were the first layer of control. Every vehicle, when it first got approved for the site, went through a strict inspection. After that inspection, it received a specific sticker on the windshield. Once you had that sticker, the process was, we verify the sticker, scan worker badges through the terminal, and if everything cleared, green light, beep, you got through. That's the official version. The reality was we were a human choke point in the middle of chaos. We were expected to move traffic fast while still enforcing rules that didn't care how many horns were blaring or how many foremen were screaming about delays. The wild part? I loved that job. It was hard, miserable in the ways that only outdoor work can be. Heat that felt like it was cooking your brain. Rain that turned everything heavy. Insects that crawled into places you didn't want to think about. Some days, even hail, and the best protection you had was a construction helmet. You stood, always, no leaning, no sitting. Leaving your post wasn't allowed for any reason, unless a supervisor physically relieved you. Supervisors were supposed to come by twice per shift so you could run to the bathroom or shovel food into your face like it was fuel. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. We didn't get sick days. We didn't get proper vacations. If someone couldn't make it, the rest of us jumped on extra hours. And because most of us were former military, there was this unspoken rule. You don't leave your people hanging. Our boss at the time, let's call him Jim, let that culture exist. He looked the other way on overtime because he knew what the job demanded. People would work 16-hour shifts. I spent nights sleeping in the underground parking garage between shifts because it was easier than driving home, getting 2 hours of sleep and turning around to do another 8. The team was basically all ex-military, mostly guys because the conditions filtered people out fast. We tried hiring women. A lot quit within days, not because they couldn't do it, but because the job was brutal and the schedule had no mercy. The women who stayed, they were tough and respected. For the first few months, it felt like I'd finally found a place where I belonged again, structured, mission-oriented, and full of people who understood the same language I did. Then a supervisor position opened. One of the supervisors was leaving to go back to school. The company posted the opening internally and told anyone who wanted it to apply. The outgoing night supervisor actually encouraged me to go for it. I was the newest guy on the site, least experience. I applied almost as a joke, like, sure, why not? There were 3 candidates, me, a guy with a lot more time in, and one of the few women on site who'd been there about a year. Jim interviewed each of us one-on-one. Mine went well. Jim liked that I was hungry and that I wasn't afraid of responsibility. And Jim was the one who'd hired me in the first place, so there was already some trust there. Next came the trial shift. Each candidate got 1 day acting as the supervisor while Jim and another supervisor, Ray, stayed close enough to step in if something went sideways. Ray wasn't competing for the position. He was happy where he was, but he was sharp, respected, and he knew the job down to the bone. My trial shift went great. I handled the standard tasks, kept the site flowing, and even dealt with a small unexpected issue without melting down. The experienced guy kept forgetting his task list and ran back to Jim every 5 minutes asking what to do next. The woman did the work fine, but her attitude was something else. When she checked posts, she demanded people call her ma'am like she was royalty, and she told anyone who'd listen that the promotion was already hers. So when Jim announced the new night supervisor was me, you could practically hear her teeth crack. I thought she'd be angry for a day and then move on. Instead, she went nuclear. Somehow, she got my personal number from the supervisor database and called my cell. The thing is, I didn't even officially know I'd been promoted yet. There hadn't been a formal notification, so I answered thinking it might be work-related. The voice on the other end dripped with poison. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't need to. She asked, "How does it feel?" I said, "Who is this?" She mocked me like I was stupid. Then she dropped it. "I got the promotion because all of you are sexist, and if I didn't give the position to her, she'd report the entire site for discrimination and get us all fired." I remember standing there with the phone to my ear, feeling this weird mix of disbelief and relief. Because her rant accidentally confirmed the promotion. I told her calmly that I got the position because I passed the tests and did the job. And then I said the thing that really lit her on fire. Something like, "If you think you deserve the job just because you're a woman, how is that not sexism too?" She snapped back with statistics. 95% of the site was male, so of course men get promoted. And I said, exactly. If 95% of the employees are men, statistically a man is more likely to get promoted. That's not proof of discrimination. That's math. Then I hung up. Right away, I called Jim and Ray and told them exactly what happened, how she got my number, what she threatened, everything. They were furious. They confirmed yes, I was promoted, and they told me they were filing a complaint with HR because she'd accessed my personal information and used it to harass and threaten me. At that point, I thought the story was over. She'd crossed a line. HR would handle it. She'd get moved or fired. For a while, that's what happened. She was removed from the site and morale improved instantly. People were glad she was gone, glad I was in the supervisor role, and we went back to work. Time passed. I settled into being a night supervisor. I learned the rhythm of the gates, the politics of contractors, the small emergencies that turn into big ones if you ignore them. I got better, and somewhere in that period, I got close with a guard nobody else could stand. I'll call him Victor. Victor was a Marine veteran who'd been part of the initial invasion of Iraq. He carried PTSD like it was stitched into his spine. He was volatile, harsh, and he could turn a normal conversation into a fight in about 2 seconds. He argued with everyone. He snapped at supervisors. He was the kind of guy most people avoided because they didn't want to be the next target. But I understood him. I'd seen versions of that pain before. I'd been around men who didn't know how to exist outside of war. Men who were still fighting something even when there was nothing in front of them. I started stopping by his post. During my rounds, we talked. Sometimes he yelled, sometimes he said nothing and just stared. Sometimes he'd unload like a dam breaking, and then eventually he started to listen. I pushed him toward the VA, toward therapy, toward something that wasn't just surviving hour to hour. Ray helped too. Ray was the kind of leader who could talk a man off a ledge without making him feel weak. Over time, Victor changed. Not instantly, not neatly, but he started trying, and then Jim disappeared. One day, he just didn't show up. A couple of days went by, no calls, no answers. At first, we were worried he'd had a medical emergency. No one just vanishes from a job like that without some kind of reason. Ray pulled the supervisors into an emergency meeting, me, Ray, and another supervisor from the second shift. We compared notes and finally decided to call the corporate office and ask what the hell was going on. They bounced us around, department to department, like nobody wanted to be the one to say it. But eventually someone in HR, someone who was friendly with Ray, let it slip. Jim had resigned. Not quietly either. He basically ran. And the reason was the woman from before, the one who'd threatened me. After she got kicked off the site, she didn't just sulk. She hired an attorney and came after the company with a lawsuit. Sexism, favoritism, sexual harassment. Here's the part that made my stomach turn. Jim was single, and he'd been messing around with her. Flirting turned into explicit messages, photos, a lot of photos. And the genius part, if you can call it that, was that he used his work phone. When the company checked the device, everything was there. Enough for them to panic, because in writing it looked like a supervisor was pressuring an employee sexually and promising career benefits. It didn't matter whether she initiated or whether he was just an idiot. Corporate didn't care about nuance. They cared about liability. So Jim walked. He resigned before the company could formally destroy him. And to avoid court, corporate did something that shocked all of us. They brought her back. Not only did they bring her back, they paid her, gave her compensation for lost work, added a bonus, gave her a promotion, and promised to hire and promote more women into leadership roles. It wasn't about justice. It was about making the lawsuit go away. She withdrew the case. Corporate called it a win. We called it a nightmare. Because now we had no real manager and we had a vindictive person on site who knew she could threaten legal action and make the company fold. For a while, the three supervisors basically ran the place, holding it together with duct tape and exhaustion, waiting for corporate to appoint a replacement. 2 months later, she proved exactly what she was. She canceled shifts last minute. Nobody wanted to cover for her. We tried to discipline her for attendance, and she immediately turned it into another threat. If we punished her, it was harassment, sexism. The boys' club retaliating. She played the system like it owed her money. And then she finally overreached. During a visit, she disrespected a representative from the oil company, the actual client, not a contractor, not a guard, the client, the people who wrote checks and decided whether we kept the contract. That representative demanded she be removed from the site permanently. When corporate tried to protect her because they were terrified of more legal action, the client made it simple. Either she goes or the oil company replaces the entire security firm. Corporate folded again. They transferred her to another location. We celebrated for about 5 minutes because the damage she triggered didn't end with her leaving. Corporate finally sent a new manager to replace Jim, a woman. Not because she was the best candidate, but because corporate needed to keep the promise they'd made to her attorney about women in leadership. Her name was Tasha, and Tasha turned the job I loved into the most toxic environment I've ever worked in. Worse than the army, worse than incompetent officers, worse than deployments where you slept in dirt and prayed you woke up. Tasha didn't introduce herself to me for nearly 2 weeks. I was the night supervisor, she was the manager. 2 weeks, and she didn't speak to me. It took her a month to even learn the guards' names. She had no military background and seemed to openly resent the fact that most of us were veterans. We were self-sufficient. We'd been through worse than long shifts and bad weather. We didn't need someone hovering over us like we were children, but that's exactly how she treated us. And I'm not exaggerating when I say micromanagement doesn't cover it. This was obsession. This was control for the sake of control. She didn't improve operations. She didn't solve problems. She barely understood the basics of the site. But she made sure everyone felt watched, judged, and disposable. Then the write-ups started, dozens at a time. Petty, technical violations, stuff that was valid on paper but insane in reality. A loose thread on your uniform. Write-up, boots not perfectly clean. On a muddy construction site. Write-up, haircut not to her taste. Write-up, fog glasses in humid weather. Write-up, she wrote someone up for having a wet uniform while it was raining. While guards were forbidden from leaving their post. There were guard booths at posts. Tiny little shacks with a chair, a small table, a mini fridge, an AC unit. In theory, you could step inside and take a breath. In reality, those booths were positioned far enough from the gate that you couldn't do your job from inside. You couldn't hear the terminal beep over the construction noise. You couldn't see the indicator light clearly. You couldn't read the windshield sticker from that distance. And when traffic was nonstop, you didn't have walk to the booth and back time. You had cars stacked up, foremen yelling, deadlines choking everybody. We explained all of this to Tasha. She didn't care. Then we noticed her pattern. She always targeted one person at a time. Every meeting, every discipline talk, every public humiliation, one guard, until that guard finally quit or got pushed out. Then she'd choose the next. Within 2 months, 12 people quit, including Ray. Ray, who I'll say clearly, was the best leader I've ever worked under, even though technically his title was below mine at one point. The most professional, respected guy on the whole site. People would have followed Ray into hell and back without hesitation. Tasha ran him out. And when Ray left, Victor lost one of the 2 people in his life he trusted. The other one was me. I'd been out of cigarettes for 3 years and I started smoking again. Other guys did too. That's how bad it got. Grown men who'd held themselves together through war were falling apart because of a manager's daily psychological war. You'd think with all the resignations we'd be understaffed. We weren't. Every time a veteran left, someone new showed up the next day. But these weren't veterans. These were the worst hires I'd ever seen. Nasty attitudes, lazy, hiding in booths, not checking vehicles properly, treating contractors like trash, ignoring rules until it became dangerous. The second shift supervisor and I called Ray and asked if he could find out what was happening through his contact in HR. And that's when we learned the truth behind the whole rot. Remember the lawsuit? Corporate needed a scapegoat for the sexism scandal, so they fired the recruiter responsible for staffing the oil contract, the guy whose whole job was verifying veterans, the one who asked those only a veteran would know questions, the one who filtered out fakes. They fired him because he had hired Jim. With him gone, nobody at corporate cared about veteran verification anymore, and that mattered because the contract with the oil company required security staff to be former military. One of the reasons, the pay was decent. Then we learned who Tasha actually was. Before our site, she had managed security at a different property. That contract got terminated, and her whole team basically lost their jobs. Some of them got scattered to low-paying posts. But our contract paid well, and somehow, shocking coincidence, Tasha was now the manager here. What we found out later was worse. She didn't lose that previous contract because the job ended. She lost it because she and her team were so incompetent that the client replaced them, and the person who handled contracts had been sleeping with her. He buried the failure so she wouldn't get fired. Then, when corporate fired the veteran recruiter, Tasha's boyfriend conveniently slid into that role, and suddenly Tasha had the authority to request specific hires. Her old team, the same people the last client couldn't stand. Now they were replacing veterans on our site, and the tactic Tasha used to make it happen was the write-up machine. Harass veterans until they quit, claim staffing emergency, invoke the contract loophole that allowed non-veterans only when there was a shortage, and then fill the spots with her people. It wasn't accidental, it was a plan. By the time I realized how deep it went, I felt like I was watching my friends get erased one resignation at a time. And then Tasha came for me. I lasted longer than most, but I wasn't special. I was just next. Eventually I quit too. But the final blow didn't start with me, it started with Victor. Victor had just lost Ray, and I was barely hanging on. Something in him snapped into a kind of focused rage, like he finally found a war worth fighting, and it wasn't overseas. Remember the vehicle stickers? They were everything. Without the sticker, you didn't enter. And stickers became a problem because contractors tried to bring in people who weren't authorized. Illegals, guys with criminal backgrounds, drivers with unsafe vehicles, cars that hadn't been inspected. Everyone wanted to bend rules to get bodies on site. So someone started printing fake stickers and selling them. At first they were laughably bad, marker on tape kinda bad, but over time they got better. Vinyl prints, clean edges. From a distance they looked real. And because Tasha's new hires were useless, the fake sticker business exploded. Victor somehow had a gift, I'm not kidding. He could spot a fake sticker from ridiculous distances, like it was a sixth sense. He'd stop a car, call it out, and be right. According to protocol, a fake sticker meant stop the vehicle, call a supervisor, locate the contractor foreman, bring a police officer assigned to the site, remove the sticker, and permanently ban the driver. That process was a time bomb. Because if Victor started catching dozens, it meant dozens of workers getting banned. Contractors losing manpower. Delays. Chaos. Victor didn't care. He started catching multiple fake sticker cars per day. Then he started teaching a few guards how to detect them too. Suddenly Tasha had to hover at the main gate constantly because the flow of violations was non-stop. The site had to bring in another police officer. A foreman rep had to be stationed at the gate. Victor turned one gate into an enforcement grinder, and it worked too well. Contractors started losing workers. Some began threatening to pull out of their agreements. The build slowed, then it started stalling. The oil company held a meeting with Tasha and Victor, basically begging him to stop. Not because he was wrong, because it was hurting them financially. Victor asked a single question that pinned them to the wall. So you want to change the rules and allow unauthorized drivers in? They couldn't say yes. They wouldn't. Safety policy, liability, legal exposure. So the meeting ended and Victor went back to the gate and kept going. Then theft started becoming visible. Because on the way out, the new guards weren't checking vehicles. Equipment and materials started walking off site. Tens of thousands of dollars at least, maybe more. That caused more delays. The oil company had already sold their old headquarters expecting to move into the new one on schedule. Now they couldn't, so they ended up renting their former building back from the new owners at a higher price. Massive cost, more pressure, more panic. At this point, everyone wanted a scapegoat. A few days later, an incident happened. The drivers were at fault, but blame got shoved onto Victor anyway. They fired him. Everyone knew it was garbage. Everyone knew he'd become inconvenient because he was enforcing rules properly. Victor didn't care. From his perspective, he'd done what he set out to do. He'd exposed the rot. He'd forced the client to see how bad things had become under Tasha's team. He'd made it impossible to pretend everything was fine. In my eyes, Victor won. After he left, he walked away from security for good. He finished school with honors, got his master's degree, finally committed to PTSD treatment. He ended up with a high disability rating and a stable monthly benefit. He didn't even need to work, but he took a job as a maintenance supervisor at a local college. The last time I saw him, he looked lighter, like the war inside him had finally gotten quieter. We still talk. He's still my friend. As for me, I got hired at another security company. And here's the irony. Jim hired me. Yeah, Jim, the guy who disappeared after the scandal, and Ray became my direct supervisor again. The three of us ended up together on a new oil and gas contract. Different site, better environment, similar work, good pay. Over time, more information surfaced about how Jim had been manipulated and what corporate had covered up. We tried to recruit Victor to join us. He refused. He was done with that world. He'd already fought his last mission. Years passed. Jim moved on to a better paying position elsewhere. We spoke once after that. I heard he got married and settled down. Ray became a contracts manager closer to home. He's still the same professional monster of a leader, calm, fair, lethal when someone tries to play games. He adopted 2 nephews and is raising them alongside his son. We still check in, and once a year if we can, we get together and drink like idiots. I worked my way up too. Ended up a senior supervisor for a while, then left over political disagreements and burned out disgust. These days I work HVAC. It's honest work and it doesn't involve watching people get destroyed by corporate cowardice. My wife and I are good. The kids grew, life stabilized, and Tasha, eventually she got fired. It didn't happen quickly. People like her don't fall fast because companies protect their own mistakes for as long as possible. It took years for the mess to unravel completely. For the right people to get sick of the losses and the turnover and the complaints and the client pressure, but karma did catch her. After Jim left that second company, he called me once with a warning. Tasha was applying to security companies again. He recognized her name and shut her down immediately. Then she applied where I worked. Guess who handled hiring? Me. I asked someone to bring her into my office. She walked in dressed sharp, smiling like she was walking into a guaranteed offer, right up until she saw me. The smile died. Her face went blank. She turned around and walked out without a word. I called Ray right after and warned him she was moving around again. A few weeks later, she showed up at his place too. Ray told me that the moment she saw him, she started crying. Not polite tears, full breakdown. She told him she hadn't been able to get hired since getting fired, that every interview, by some coincidence, ended up being conducted by a veteran who'd worked on that construction site. Word had spread the way it always spreads in tight industries. She was losing her home. Her husband had left and took the kids when he found out who she'd been sleeping with to keep contracts and secure positions. She'd been living out of her car. She begged Ray for a job. Ray listened, because that's who he is. And then he told her to go to hell, because Ray knew what she did. He knew how she destroyed a site that used to function, how she turned veterans into disposable obstacles, how she replaced good people with trash, how she helped make Victor the scapegoat. And Ray, former Marine, professional to the core, looked at the wreckage she created and decided she didn't deserve another chance to do it again. I won't pretend I felt sorry for her. Not after watching friends break under her control. Not after watching a system reward her until it couldn't hide the cost anymore. Not after seeing Victor fight the only way he knew how and still get tossed aside. There are a lot of lessons you can squeeze out of a story like this. People love clean morals. Mine is simpler. If you build your career on other people's pain and call it leadership, eventually you'll meet someone who remembers. And when you do, you'll learn the hard way that some doors don't open twice. And if you ever get the chance to choose who you become in a toxic system, be Victor, be Ray, be the person who does the job right even when the world begs you not to. Because that's the only kind of revenge that actually lasts.
That's where the story ends. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think of this story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and see you next time.